Hey guys, Rick Stone here from Stony Acres Gardening. Welcome to my channel. It is February and I am super excited because there is a ton that you can be planting indoors to get started on your garden this month, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now this video is designed for those of you that live in gardening zones 5 through 7, but more important than your garden zone is your frost date. And I'm going to be talking a lot about your last frost date in this video, and all of us that live in zones 5, 6, and 7 have a relatively similar range of frost dates. Most of it's going to be somewhere between, April 1st and May 15th, right in there. And so I will be giving you instructions based on those frost dates, not particularly based on your garden zone. Before we get started, I did want to kind of give you a little bit of a story about how things happened with me. As I started with my seed starting years ago, 20 years ago now, I really got frustrated, especially in the spring when it came to when to start my cool season crops. So my brassica, my lettuce, all of those things. It took me a while to get the timing figured out for those. And so I wanted to make sure that I gave you some videos that are going to help you make that happen so that you don't have the same troubles that I did. So let's talk about February and what we should be planting, and there's just a ton of stuff that we should be doing. The first is leafy greens. So you can see I've already got a little bit of lettuce going. I wanted to have some things for this video. We are going to be planting all of the leafy type greens this month. Lettuce, spinach, chard, kale, bok choy, all of those leafy type plants we want to get started in February. So here's your timing on that. Normally we want to have those out somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks before our last frost date. So let's use mine as an example. My last frost date is May 15th. I want to be getting those out somewhere between April 1st and April 15th out into my garden. I want to set those plants out. So that means I need to be starting them 10 to 12 weeks before that last frost date, which means for me, about mid-February is when I'm going to be starting most of those leafy greens. You tweak that date a little bit based on when your last frost date is. It could be as early as the 1st of February, it could be as late as the end of February, but sometime during this month, you want to be planting those leafy greens indoors if you're going to start any of them indoors, okay? So that's our leafy greens. Now, group number 2 is the Brassica family. So the Brassica family is your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts. All of those kind of land in that same family, and we want to be putting good, strong transplants out into the garden about 4 weeks before our last frost date. So again, for me, May 15th is my last frost date. I want plants ready to go out in the garden on April 15th. So I want 6 to 8 week old transplants ready at that time, which means I am going to be starting my broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, etc. about the middle of February, 8 weeks before I want them to go out. 12 weeks before that last frost date is when I'm going to start all of those plants. So middle of February for me is when those are going to go in. Again, for you, that could be a little bit earlier in the month, which is why I'm doing this video at the first of the month, so that you can get those things started right away. Now, there is another group of kind of general plants that you want to be concerned about during the month of February as well. If you haven't started onions yet, get them in now. Onions and leeks need a lot of time. You want them to go out 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date. If you haven't done it yet, get them planted February 1st. I don't care where you live, get them planted ASAP, okay, for your onions and your leeks. If you're watching this video later in the month, you might consider buying them this year and starting next year with starts, because they need about 10 weeks to mature. And that means that if you haven't already started them by, the 5th of February, then you're in trouble, okay? So get them ASAP, get those started. Now, bunching onions, sometimes we call those green onions, are a little bit different. They don't take as long to grow. We don't have a bulbing period. They're not affected by day length and all that kind of stuff. And so bunching onions, you can actually start any time during the month of February. So get bunching onions in. You'll want to put those out, maybe 4 weeks before your last frost date, possibly a little bit later than that even if you want. But they're going to need about 8 weeks to mature indoors, and so sometime in February you want to do those bunching onions. Then we have celery. Celery is a long plant. It takes a long time for it to grow. So I like to get my celery started now in February. About 12 weeks before my last frost date, I'm going to try and get those set out into the garden somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks before my last frost date, which means mid-February is when I'm going to be making that happen here inside. So celery is another one that we want to get planted. There are some herbs that you can get started now. These would all be what we would consider cool season herbs. So things like parsley, cilantro, and chives. All of those you can get started in February. Get them to be about 8 weeks old, and we're going to put them out sometime in April, as much as a month before your last frost date, and you should be in really good shape with those. So all of those you can go. Your warmer season plants like oregano, basil, things like that, you're going to want to hold off on those. But those cool seasons, you can get those in right away. And then the last thing that we want to be worried about is flowers. So both your cool season flowers, things like pansies, definitely you're going to want to get started. But a lot of our warm season flowers, and I'm just going to give you a few examples here, petunias, zinnias, marigolds, cosmos. There's literally hundreds of those what we would consider warm season flowers. They take 10 to 12 weeks of growing indoors before they're ready to be set out in the garden. So we are at that time right now. Mid-February for me means that I need to be starting all of those petunias, zinnias, marigolds, all of the different flowers need that 12 weeks of growing indoors before they can be set outside. So that's February. So you need to look, whatever flowers that you are planning on growing for your garden this year, you need to look at that package, because chances are it's going to say 10 to 12 weeks before your first frost date. Before your last frost date is when you're going to want to get those started, and that is February for most of us. Okay, so get looking at those flowers, whatever those flowers are that you want to grow. Even the warm season ones need extra time, and so we're going to want to make that happen in February. Now, everybody asks me, when can I start my tomatoes? And normally for those of us in zones 5, 6, and 7, we're going to want to wait a little bit longer on our tomatoes. Probably sometime in March, we are going to be starting our tomatoes and peppers and some of those warm season crops. But I've got a cheat for you. If you are willing to buy a couple of wall of waters. So wall of waters are these water-filled clotches that we put over the top of our tomato plants. And they create kind of this mini greenhouse effect that insulates those plants from the last of the cold weather. If you want to buy some of those, Wall of Water is kind of the most popular name brand, but there's Cozy Coats, and some of them are just called season extenders. They're these water, you fill them up with water and use them as kind of a little greenhouse out in your garden. If you want to buy some of those, then you can actually get some tomatoes started in February, because those Wall of Waters allow you to put your tomatoes out about 4 to maybe even as much as 6 weeks before your last frost date. And I know that sounds crazy, but it actually works. So I will try, and I don't plant all of my tomatoes in Wall of Waters because it is slightly risky, okay, to do. So I will usually just maybe plant 4 plants in February that will be ready to go out in mid-April in a Wall of Water. And that will get me some early tomatoes. And that's how I get tomatoes in July living in zone 6, is by putting a few of my tomatoes out in a Wall of Water in mid-April. So you want to think about smaller varieties for those early tomatoes. So I'm going to plant 2 San Marzano tomatoes this year, and I'm going to plant 2 early girl tomatoes this year in February that will be ready to go out in April in a Wall of Water, and that will give me my early tomatoes. The rest of my tomatoes, all of my heirlooms and all of my bigger tomatoes, I'm not going to worry about until March. But if you want to get some early ones in and you want to use a Wall of Water, then February is the time to start those. And for me, Wall of Waters are most effective for tomatoes. They will help you with peppers and other things like that, but tomatoes seem to do the best in the wall of water. So I'm going to plant a few tomatoes as well. So what am I actually doing this month then in February? All of my brassicas, my first round of leafy greens. Actually, you can see it's going to be the second round of leafy greens, but we'll do all of the brassica family and a few tomatoes, and then a bunch of flowers. We're going to be starting a bunch of different flowers that will go both in our flower beds and out in the garden. All of that's going to be happening in February. So a lot happens during the month of February. You need to be getting a lot planted. One thing that I did want to leave you guys with, we are all about making sure that you learn how to grow your own starts this year. Prices in the nurseries and the big box stores have gotten absolutely ridiculous. Last year, the cheapest tomato plants that I could find were $6 each for one plant, okay? That's crazy, and I don't want you paying that anymore. And so this year, we are all about teaching you how to grow your own seedlings, and we're doing that by giving some free workshops. So we've already done a couple of them so far this year, and we are going to do at least 2 or 3 more during the month of February and March. And so if you go down in the description of this video and look, there's a link that will tell you the dates, and you can go get signed up for these workshops. So they're private workshops. We're doing them on a separate platforms so that we don't have to worry about internet trolls and things like that. So you do need to get signed up for it. I just need your name and your email address. There's a link in the description. Click on that. Go get signed up for it. It'll be about an hour long, and we're going to teach you the basics of how to grow your own seedlings indoors. It's a great way to get started on growing those seedlings, and we will have 2 of those workshops in February for you to watch, and probably some more in March as well, depending on what participation is like. So get signed up down below. All right, that's all I have for you for this week. Get your seedlings started in February, and we will talk to you next week. Happy gardening.